Welcome to another preview. So what I'm going to be doing today is talking about my updated team selection and transfer plans, then moving on to all of the latest news, injury updates and all of the main topics, and then after that talking about the top 5 captaincy options for the week, and then we're going to be showing you the best free hit team you can make exclusively for Game Week 11. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So I already made my transfer very early on. I did Diaz to Reece James and not much has changed there. But in terms of future transfer plans, I have actually altered it slightly. So I did show you some possibilities in order to fund the move for Heung-min Son in my team selection video, but I think I would change that because of what Bruno Lage said in his press conference. So I was considering maybe doing Jamie Vardy down to Hwang, and that would give me enough money to move Townsend up to Son, and that didn't seem too bad. And it's not because Hwang blanked. It's because of what Bruno Lage said in his press conference. He basically stated that Jimenez is pretty much the nailed attacker in the team, but then the other two forwards, it depends on the profile of the opponent, and that will determine who starts between Adama Traore, Hwang and all of these other options. And of course when Pedro Neto is back in the mix and all these others, and I don't want to be a part of that. And also looking at the fixtures from Game Week 14 probably up until 21, the fixtures are very poor for Wolves, only a few decent ones in between. So ultimately I don't think I'm going to be going down that route, so I have to find another way to fund Heung-min Son. And with the form that Foden is in, I don't want to get rid of him right now, but of course I could change my mind in a few weeks time. But that's pretty much the update. The captaincy will probably remain the same on Mohamed Salah, and I'll be talking about him later on in the captaincy, and I don't want to overcomplicate that situation too much. Livramento and Cancelo is probably the big headache I have in terms of the team selection, and you could even include Antonio in there, but I probably won't be benching him. I think West Ham could actually expose Liverpool to a certain extent. They were very shaky against Brighton, and I think West Ham can cause some damage. So that's kind of something to think about. I've currently gone with Cancelo, but I think even yesterday I had Livramento in my team. And let's wait and see. He just keeps on producing. It's very difficult to bench him, and he is playing like a 5 or 6 million defender at the moment. So now let's look at the fixtures. Now, the first game of the weekend is Southampton against Aston Villa. So remember, it is a Friday deadline. Keep that in mind. And we don't know anything else about Broca yet, but when Ralph Hasenhüttl has his press conference, we will find out more. Same with any other kind of injury news from both teams. Aston Villa are really struggling at the moment. They haven't won a game since their victory at Old Trafford, and their form is pretty much the worst in the league in recent times, and they are looking really bad. Even in terms of the underlying stats, they're the worst for XGC. So I wouldn't be too surprised if Southampton get a victory here, but let's wait and see what the press conferences say. And then moving on to Man United against Man City, early kickoff on the Saturday, and what a game this is. Man United, of course, they just managed to clutch a draw against Atalanta in the Champions League, but very fortunate to do so once again. And Ole Gunnar Solskjaer always seems to find a way to remain in his job. And Manchester City, on the back of 2 defeats in a row, obviously they still have their Champions League game to play tonight. Let's see how they do, but Manchester City will be looking for a response, and you wouldn't be too surprised if they're fully up for this game. And this should be very interesting. United, you would assume, are going to be very defensive, but Varane did come off injured during the Champions League, so he could be a doubt for the weekend, and that might put Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's plans for a back three in jeopardy. They did actually switch to a back four when Greenwood came on for Varane, so that's something to think about as well. Then we have Brentford against Norwich. So Mbeumo was on the bench against Burnley in their 3-1 defeat, but the fact that he was on the bench and he's had pretty much a week since then to recover, he should be back in the starting lineup, and I think Brentford did miss him and his combination with Ivan Toney. And finally, will Ivan Toney translate those good and promising underlying stats into points? Let's wait and see. And Norwich is definitely one of the best fixtures for Brentford to target to try turn their form around a little bit. And then Chelsea against Burnley. Chelsea actually rested Ben Chilwell and Reece James, which obviously on paper is looking very promising, but at the same time Alonso could actually start yet again at left wing back. I'd be a bit more confident about Reece James on the right hand side starting, but in terms of the rest, who knows with Chelsea. Mason Mount missed out again because of an illness, but he should be fine for the weekend. Of course, let's wait and see what further updates we get from Thomas Tuchel, and of course Werner and Lukaku still long-term absentees, or at least for the next few weeks and maybe a month or so. And then we've got Crystal Palace against Wolves, and as I alluded to earlier, not very convinced by the kind of the description from Bruno Lage about his forwards other than Raul Jimenez, because Juan could be subject to rotation. Maybe not so much now, but in the coming weeks and months when the other wingers come back and there are plenty of headaches for the Portuguese manager to contend with, that's when it could become an issue. And Crystal Palace, of course, off the back of that very impressive victory at Manchester City, so that should be a good game as well. But in terms of FPL assets, there's not much more that's happened that we don't know already. Marçal is still an absentee. Let's wait and see what the press conferences say, of course. And then we have Brighton against Newcastle. Trossard played as that false 9 against Liverpool, and he got his reward with a very nice and well taken equaliser. So of course Trossard could actually be a really good option in Game Week 11. And with Newcastle, not much really to report, but Unai Emery actually rejected or turned down the proposal to become the Newcastle manager. But other than that, really, it's the same old Newcastle at the moment. They're going to be fighting to stay in the division, and they're looking really poor at the moment, and they need a manager as soon as possible. Let's see if Eddie Howe takes the job or someone else. And then Arsenal against Watford. Not much really that has changed since then. Arsenal pretty much have a fully fit squad other than Xhaka, who is still out for a few months, and Kieran Tierney, who is probably going to miss out yet again. And Nuno Tavares could be a very interesting option, as I talked about a few weeks ago, around 4.3, 4.4 million. So he's looking very promising. Aubameyang's a very nice differential captaincy potentially. Smith Rowe can continue his fine form. And if you have Bukayo Saka, I wouldn't be getting rid of him out of this fixture. I think Watford could be a really good one to target. But let's wait and see. This will be a very good test for Arsenal to see if they can actually push for the top 4 or not. And then we've got Everton against Spurs. Obviously, the big news here is Antonio Conte becoming the Spurs manager. And a lot of people are already bringing in Reguilon, Harry Kane and Heung-min Son, which is completely understandable. But I think I'd be a bit more cautious with Reguilon and other defenders for Spurs, because there are still other teams like Liverpool, Manchester City and Chelsea who all boast better defences. But with Son and Kane, I can completely understand, and I'll be talking about both of them later on. Son is still probably my preference, but Kane, he can finally rejuvenate his form, and Antonio Conte will be a big part of that. And then we've got Leeds against Leicester, and Rafinha obviously got 9 points against Norwich, and he did the business there, but can he do it against Leicester? He's going to be up against Thomas most likely, and I think he can get at him. And a lot of goals that Leicester have conceded have come down that flank which Rafinha operates in, so very promising stuff. I have to say though, in recent game weeks at least, from game week 5 onwards, Leicester have been one of the better defences. I think in terms of XGC they're the 4th best, but still I'm not too keen on Leicester. The way they defended against Arsenal was so poor, and if they do that against Leeds, I know they've been struggling, but Rafinha should be able to get some returns. But of course he always kind of teases, but he never really delivers the amount of points he should. And then West Ham against Liverpool, a lot of people are considering getting rid of Antonio, and personally what I think is that there's no right or wrong answer, and I'm not sitting on the fence here. It ultimately depends on the team you have. If I already have Ivan Toney, I'd be tempted to keep Antonio and then just bench him for some of these games. Although against Liverpool, I probably would start him based on their performance against Brighton. But against Manchester City, potentially, and Chelsea, that's where you could bench the West Ham forward. And in the other games, of course, you'd start him. But even if you sell, I don't think you're really going to regret that over the next 5 game weeks or so. But you probably would want to get him back in around game week 16 or game week 18, so bear that in mind. But I think if you already have Ivan Toney, you don't have to sell Antonio, because you look at Raul Jimenez, yes, he's got some good fixtures coming up, but then from game week 14 onwards, for several game weeks and months, you could say, Wolves have some pretty poor fixtures. And then of course with Hwang, he's not really going to be a nailed starter all the time based on Bruno Lage's comments. So I look at all the other options, maybe Broca, and they'll give you a lot of money in the bank to get Harry Kane or a Heung-min Son, maybe a Ronaldo in a few weeks' time. But let's wait and see if he's fit. I'm not really liking the forward options too much. Calvert-Lewin is still injured, made his appearance on Sky as a pundit, and of course Bamford is also another absentee. So at the moment we don't really have too many options up front. So I think with Antonio, you don't have to sell him, but at the same time, I don't think he's going to deliver that much in order for you to regret selling the forward. So before we talk about the top 5 captaincy options, I want to highlight Chilwell versus James, and all of these graphics that you're going to see are courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub and Frank FF Stuff, so obviously a big kudos to them. Very, very nice graphics, and obviously you've got all the key stats that you need on screen. They can help you with your transfers and your decision making. So with Chilwell and James, I've actually decided to compare from game week 7 onwards, which was when Chilwell started, because before that Chilwell didn't even make any single appearance for Chelsea across the entire season. So as you can see, Chilwell does have the extra appearance, but in terms of XG, only marginally better than Reece James, both of them around the 1 mark, so very impressive. And in terms of expected assists, Reece James is even better despite playing 1 game less. And in terms of the shots and shots on target, very similar once again. You'd expect if Reece James had another appearance under his belt, he'd pretty much be identical to Ben Chilwell. And in terms of goals and assists, both of them have 3. And over the course of the season, Reece James has 4. He's the highest scorer for Chelsea in the Premier League. He also scored against Arsenal in game week 2. Ben Chilwell, of course, didn't make an appearance up until game week 7. And in terms of big chances created, Reece James is also leading that with 1 big chance, compared to Chilwell's 0. And in terms of key passes, very similar here again, with Chilwell marginally winning here. But once again, Reece James does have that 1 game less, and both of them are looking like great options, of course, in game weeks 9 and 10. Both of them combining for some very, very healthy returns. And if I had to pick one at the moment, I still would go for Chilwell. But heading into game week 11, it's a bit of a weird one because I think Chilwell is more likely to be dropped than Reece James. But I think for the long term, just because Chilwell doesn't really come on for those 1-pointers, he's probably the one I would prefer. I've got both of them now in my team. Let's see how they do. But of course, I can see the appeal of Reece James. He doesn't really have as much competition as Chilwell does because there's no other natural right wing back. But of course, Azpilicueta can still take some minutes when he plays there, and Hudson-Odoi once the forwards, Romelu Lukaku and Timo Werner, come back. So that's kind of my assessment there. I'm still saying that Chilwell's the better option, but not by much. And I can completely understand why you'd go for Reece James. They're both pretty much a similar price now. James did go up to 5.8 million last night. So take your pick there and stick to it. And if not, why not have both at this moment in time? So now let's look at the top 5 captaincy options for the week, and it's between Toney and Mbeumo. Of course, take your pick depending on who you have in your own team. If I had to pick one, I'd probably go for Toney because of the superior stats. Of course, he hasn't just come back from an injury, and he's also a bit more clinical, or at least maybe not this season because he's also not really delivering, but he is the talisman for Brentford, and he scored a lot of goals in the last campaign to help get them promoted. But if we actually look at the stats, both of them have scored twice, but of course, bear in mind that Toney did have 1 extra game. And Toney does have 2 assists compared to Mbeumo's 0. And in terms of shots and shots on target, very identical. So Toney does have nearly double the amount of shots on target. Mbeumo does hit the post a lot, of course, as we know. 6 times the Frenchman has hit the woodwork. But in terms of shots, 25 compared to 22, very identical. Shots in the box, Toney also leads in this statistics with 18 compared to 14. XG, also superior, but not by much. I think the main difference is in terms of expected assists, where Toney has over 3 compared to Mbeumo, who hasn't even registered 1 over the course of the season. And in terms of big chances created, Toney's created 5 and Mbeumo has created 0. And in terms of key passes, once again, Toney nearly doubling Mbeumo. And what you can see here clearly is that in terms of goal threat, both of them are very similar. And I think what really separates them is the creativity. Toney takes that creative role and Mbeumo gets into those good positions, arguably even better than Toney, and that's what makes the partnership work so well. But of course, both of them haven't really scored or assisted too much this season, so we need to see more from them. But I think Norwich is a really good fixture to target. If you have both, I would start both of them, even if you have to bench a player like Cancelo. But still, both of them really good options. If I had to pick, it would be Toney. But then again, I can see the appeal of Mbeumo with the extra point as a midfielder for scoring a goal and for getting the clean sheet. Now in number 4 for the captaincy, I've gone for another duo in Harry Kane and Heung-min Son. If I had to pick one, I'd probably go for Harry Kane, despite Son being far better this season. Now the reason for this is because Harry Kane has Conte now breathing down his neck, and I think he'll start delivering once again. Obviously there's no guarantee, and maybe this is more of a hopeful thing in terms of FPL, but still I think Harry Kane has a really good record against Everton. He scored 12 goals against the Evertonians, and that's his second favourite opponent behind Leicester. And also Everton have the second worst XGC over the last 4 game weeks. Only Aston Villa are worse. So I think Harry Kane and Son, take your pick there. I still think Son is the better long-term asset, but once again, we don't know how they're going to play under Conte, so all of this is hypothetical, and we probably should wait and see before we get them in. But of course, this could be a really good fixture. Everton are struggling at the moment. They're one of the worst teams in the league in recent game weeks, and I think this Spurs duo can take full advantage, and Harry Kane can start delivering once again. Now in number 3 we have Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. I think he could be the ultimate differential captaincy this week. If not, if you want to go ultra left field, you can go for a Trossard or Reece James or Ben Chilwell, who honestly they could actually feature in this top 5 as well. But Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang facing Watford, I think he can do extremely well in this fixture. And his overall stats aren't too impressive, if I'm being completely honest, but they have improved drastically since Arsenal's form has turned around. And what I would say about the Gabonese is that he's scoring all of his goals at home, and he's got a really nice streak going on at the moment. I think that's 4 games in a row in which he has scored at the Emirates. Of course, maybe a bit fortunate against Aston Villa. He missed the penalty and then got the rebound, but he was very good in that game. He got the assist for Smith Rowe's goal, and his overall play, I have to say, is much better than it was in, I'd say, the weeks and months beforehand. Obviously, last season, very disappointing for Aubameyang and his high standards. But if we look here, 4 goals and an assist, and he's got 22 shots, with 11 of them being on target. His expected goals is almost 4, which is pretty decent, and his expected assist is just over 1. So he is showing a bit of everything at the moment, but of course, with him, you're mainly relying on goals. And then in terms of big chances, he's had 5 this season, but no big chances created. But 8 key passes, pretty impressive, I have to say. And he's a decent punt for the next few game weeks, I'd say. But I wouldn't be bringing him in right now with Liverpool on the horizon and Manchester United. But I think Watford, Newcastle and Everton in the next 5, he could do extremely well in all of them, especially in those home games. Now, taking the number 2 spot is Jamie Vardy, and a lot of people are getting rid of him ahead of this fixture, and I wouldn't recommend that at all. I know he faces Chelsea next, and you might want to be in a rush to get Heung-min Son and Harry Kane potentially, but I wouldn't do it this week. If anything, do it ahead of game week 12, but obviously bear in mind he has some very good fixtures afterwards as well. Vardy is always kind of known as this stats buster, but this season his stats are actually impressive. Then again, not too much difference with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, I have to say, and it's not like Aubameyang's statistics have been absolutely amazing, but Vardy over 4xG, normally you'd probably say is half that by this stage of the season, but he's overperforming because of how good of a finisher he is. His expected assist is 1.21. He has had 7 big chances this season, and yeah, no big chances created, but 11 key passes, so he's doing it all. 7 goals, only 1 assist, but he's been in fine form, obviously, the last 2 games. Very disappointing, and a lot of people, including myself, have brought him in for that. 2 points across 2 game weeks, but I think this is a fixture for Vardy and Leicester to target and to do really well and then kickstart their season, because honestly, Leicester tend to start well and then fade away as the season progresses. This time they haven't really started too well, so they need that reaction and they need to be on a run, otherwise top 4 is probably going to be a long shot for them. But Jamie Vardy is a really good option this week, and you could arguably captain him over the most popular captaincy choice nowadays, but still, I think Jamie Vardy is an exceptional option, maybe not quite the best, but still a really good option nonetheless. And finally, what a surprise, we've got Mohamed Salah number 1, so maybe what I should start doing nowadays is not even include Salah in these debates and just leave him out. So we know he's the best, but if you're thinking of 5 different alternative options, then we'll go for that. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. But Salah, actually, very impressive record against West Ham. He hasn't scored against any team more times than against West Ham. Watford is the other team that he loves playing against. So Salah, very good fixture, despite how good West Ham have been. They're 3rd in the table at the moment, and they can cause Liverpool some problems. But I think defensively they won't be able to cope with Salah and the other forwards for Liverpool. But of course, you could argue his ceiling won't be too high, just like it wasn't against Brighton despite the disallowed goal there. But Salah's showing incredible form. Let's see how he does against Atletico Madrid tonight. But in terms of stats as well, look at his expected goals. Over 8 is absolutely crazy. And his expected assist is 4.97. I've never seen stats like this, to be honest, from a Premier League player. This is literally Messi, Ronaldo in their prime-esque stats. It's absolutely incredible. 7 big chances created, 23 key passes, and 42 shots 24 of them on target. I mean, you can see the stats there on screen. They're absolutely ridiculous. And Salah is just an amazing option every single week. Obviously, there will be occasions when he faces Chelsea away or Manchester City away where you probably would be tempted to go elsewhere. But for the time being, I just probably wouldn't overthink it too much. And unless you are confident and 100% sure that another player will outscore him, I would just not overcomplicate it and go for Mohamed Salah as your captain. But of course, play the game the way you want and don't let other people tell you what to do. But personally, I'm just going to be going for Salah for the time being. Now let's look at the best free hit team you can make ahead of Game Week 11. Now, I will be suggesting one or two alternatives because, of course, some of the kind of best captaincy options don't feature in here. But in terms of the goalkeepers, Ramsdale and Fernandes, I think they're the two best this week. Of course, you don't have to go for both of them. You could just go for one. And of course, that'll give you enough money to then make other changes elsewhere in this team. And then looking at the defenders, it's very simple this week. Chilwell and James, two of the most popular options at the moment, both of them featuring. What I would say though is that don't be too surprised if Marcos Alonso starts at left wing back for Chelsea, but if you want to take the risk and bring Chilwell in this week, then go ahead. Just bear in mind there is a risk, but maybe I am overthinking it a bit too much, and you probably have to with Tuchel and Pep Guardiola, but I think both of them could be really good this week. I'd be surprised if both of them were benched at the same time, but just so much value offered by both of them when they do start, and their attacking potential is through the roof. They're even rivaling Trent. They're scoring more goals than him, and of course, you might even argue they're better assets at the moment. And then I've gone for Shane Duffy at home to Newcastle. He could do really well. Of course, just bear in mind when Dan Burn comes back, Duffy could once again be subject to being dropped to the bench once again. Then we've got Tavares, an interesting option here, only 4.3 million. I think at home to Watford he can get the clean sheet, and he's actually having the most touches in the box of any defender in the last few game weeks since he's actually been introduced into the starting 11. And Arsenal haven't missed Kieran Tierney by any stretch of the imagination, and that's high praise because he's been one of Arsenal's best players in recent years. So Tavares is looking really good, and if you want a cheap defender that isn't Livramento, consider Tavares for the time being. And then speaking of the legendary cheap defender, the new Lundstram some call him, Livramento, you probably should start him at this point, but of course you don't have to when Duffy's playing Newcastle and Tavares is playing Watford. Take your pick here in terms of your third defender. I think the most likely to keep a clean sheet is Brighton and Duffy, but maybe Tavares and Livramento just offer more attacking threat, at least from assists. But all of them are good options. Chilwell and James would definitely start in this team, of course, but there's not really, I'd say, a concrete answer in terms of who you select as that final defender. Then we have four in midfield. We have Norman there as your kind of budget midfielder. And of course, he can be decent this week, even against Brentford. But I wouldn't really overthink this too much, and it's just someone to have on your bench. Heung-min Son against Everton. Yes, it's Harry Kane who tends to do very well against the Toffees, but still, Heung-min Son is a great option, and I still think he is the best one from Spurs. And let's wait and see how he does under Conte. Maybe Harry Kane now becomes the talisman like he was last season, but Heung-min Son is offering great value despite Spurs looking terrible at times. But you wouldn't expect that to happen so often nowadays, and they do face Everton, who have been lackluster in recent weeks, so I think this is a great fixture to target as well. Then we've got Mbeumo. Speaking of, fixtures to target, Norwich, it doesn't get any better than that really, and Mbeumo could do extremely well. This is where he finally doesn't hit the post so much and he can actually get that into the back of the net, but let's wait and see, of course. We do get carried away sometimes with Mbeumo, but of course he's got the underlying stats. They're very impressive for someone of his price bracket. And I think it's just as simple as that. Target the fixture and go for Mbeumo. And of course, if I didn't really have other transfer plans, I probably would have got Mbeumo in for Townsend, but I didn't end up doing that, to be honest. And then we've got Mohamed Salah away to West Ham. It's just kind of an auto pick. Don't really think about it too much. You saw the underlying stats. You've seen them yourself with your eyes. Let's not overthink that too much. And then we've got Trossard as a very, very differential player here. Playing as that false nine for Brighton, if he continues to do so, and to be fair, with the success it brought against Liverpool, why would Graham Potter changed that, to be honest? I'm not too sure, but I think Trossard could be really good against Newcastle. Once again, one of the worst defensive teams at the moment, and teams in general. They're 19th in the league, and they're just looking a shambles at this current moment in time. And I think Trossard and Brighton can take advantage. But of course, if you don't trust Brighton offensively, and to be fair, I don't blame you, their XG is one of the lowest over the last 4 game weeks. before the Liverpool game, then I honestly would consider going for Smith Rowe instead. So of course you don't have to go for him, and you could even go for Rafinha for a little bit more. I think he could do alright against Leicester, but Trossard could be a fantastic differential this week. And now let's look at the most interesting part of this team, I'd say. Ivan Toney is a very, I'd say, general pick. No one is going to be really surprised to see him here. Let's see if he can actually finally get those returns, because just like in Mbumo, they've been under-delivering significantly, but I think Toney will do well finally in this fixture. But of course, that could be famous last words as well, and we did talk about him, of course, in the captaincy. We put him 5th in the overall captaincy list. Then we've got Jamie Vardy, number 2 in that captaincy list. I think he could do really well this week. And of course, Daka, when he starts to get into the team more, he could be a fantastic option. Iheanacho's not too bad. Maddison could be promising. Tielemans, of course, has been Leicester's best player this season, but I would just go for Jamie Vardy. FPL-wise, he is still their best option, and I think Leeds, the way they play, it could actually play into Leicester's hands. But actually, funnily enough, I think since game week 5, Leeds actually have the 3rd or 4th best defence in terms of XGC, so bear that in mind too. But Jamie Vardy still, I think, can do really well in this game. And I think he has a high ceiling. And then Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, another one with a high ceiling. And I think against Watford, he's just primed for returns. And I'd be very surprised if Arsenal don't score 2 goals or more in this game. But then again, Arsenal are a very inconsistent team. So maybe you won't trust them and go for someone like Aubameyang, even on a free hit. And I can understand that. And what you could do here is, instead of going for Fernandes, downgrade him to Foster and maybe make money elsewhere. Like, for example, Trossard down to Smith Rowe. And then you can upgrade Aubameyang to Harry Kane, who I think could do extremely well against Everton. So that's kind of the only change that you could possibly make. You can get, for example, Harry Kane in here. Of course, in terms of my budget, I wouldn't be able to afford it here. But once again, with those changes I discussed, downgrading the keeper and Trossard, you would be able to afford it. So let me know what you think of this best free hit team down in the comment section below, and the top 5 captaincy options. Ben Chilwell and Reece James, who were featuring in the topic section, they could actually be one of the best captaincy options as well, and maybe they should be 3rd or 2nd in that, or maybe 1st, who knows. But thank you very much for watching. If you found this useful or entertaining, smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Very much appreciate all the support over the last few months. As I always say, very much appreciated. Good luck with FPL Gameweek 11 and for the rest of the season. Enjoy the football, and of course, I'll see you in the deadline stream very soon, and I'll see you next time.